Okay, we're back, and I am painting these little veins in here. If I start here and I feather it out to the edge, I can see that they kind of do this. And I made a mixture of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue to make a brown. I'm using this 0 brush from Rosemary. It's an Anna Mason brush. And that's still too harsh. I'm not liking how harsh that is. So I will just go in and soften this a little bit right there with a wet brush. Let that bleed a little. Okay, and then we'll lighten that up. I kind of like that coming down there, even though that's not doing that in the real photograph. I like that, so we'll kind of let that do that. Blot that off a bit. We're not going to do a lot of detail here, just a little bit. If you notice, these veinings start at the center and then they move out. Need a little more water on my brush. And then they come out here like this. And just different. And then to soften it, you can just dab it back. And you can make this as detailed as you want to. I'm not going to make this very detailed because it tends to look too contrived if you make it too detailed. So we're not going to probably do a lot more than that. And I may reevaluate that and even do less. I'm losing my whites over here, so I've got to be really careful there. So we just do suggestions of detail here and there. Still not liking this down here, so we may change that. Just strengthening that. That comes in there. These tiny little brushes hold so little pigment that they're probably not worth it. I wouldn't buy them again. I need to connect. This is a little 1/8 inch. It's called a number 5 flat. It's a Master's Touch brush that I use for scrubbing out things. And I want this to come in to have a starting point right here. So I'm just lifting right now. I'm lifting these shapes. And these are all way too symmetrical. So I'm just trying to lift those out and make them less predictable there. When you're lifting like this, if you just gently irritate your paper and wipe it off and then blot it. kind of want these to form a reason for being here, so we'll do that. And then down here we'll just give some, we'll lift some highlights just so that we have some interest in the petals. And I'm using a very light touch. Just creating form. It's really not taking up much, if anything. Just to give it some interest. Up here, the same thing. I just wiggle it back and forth. Just making that little highlights just to make it a little more interesting. And you know, we can easily overwork this, so if I were doing this as a painting that I intended to sell, I would spend a lot more time on this, and I would build up the detail much more significantly, doing things like this along that ruffled edge. But since this is pretty much for people who are relatively new to watercolor, we're not going to do as much detail. That should dry a little bit darker. And if you get too much detail, just smooth it out. Soften it. Soften those edges. You can go over watercolor much more than people think. It's really more forgiving than people think it is. This makes us nice ruffled edges. So I'm just moving the paint around basically right now. Lightening in some areas, darkening in others. Just creating some form in the petals. I don't think I like that one coming that way. All right. Okay, I decided I would show you how to reclaim whites that you have lost. So what I've done is I've scrubbed out some of these places where I lost the whites completely, like right here. I don't know how that happened, but it did. So I have taken a Chinese white watercolor, and I am just going to go back in and put these little areas back in. And they will merge with what's currently on the page, so they won't be as white, as bright. So you may have to go over them a couple of times. And down here, where we lost some of these whites. And this is another way you can clean up your rough edges of your your masking fluid. If you can easily straighten that out by going over it with white. And this is watercolor. It's just opaque watercolor. And as you can see, it brings back a little of the sparkle. And this is most helpful, especially in botanicals, because it's very hard to keep these details. And it's just icing on the cake. It just gives you a little more interest. And you can see you can even add these little dots that are down at the bottom here, which is pretty cool. I don't always use this, but in times when I feel like I need it, it's certainly available. We want to get this petal folding over here. You can also use white gouache. If you use gouache, it does change your painting to a mixed media painting though. So just be aware of that. If you use watercolor, it does not. And you can see how it just fades back. So you have to use several. I don't know what this was right here, so we'll just make something up here. We've kind of got this turning over here. You can overdo this also, like I've just done right there. So I'll go back and soften that. And that's all you have to do to soften it. So you see, you work back and forth into these things just as much as you need to. And I'm probably going to call that done, but you never know. So with me, if I see something a day later or sometime later, I'll just add it. I'll go back in and add it. But right now, and the thicker you make your paint, of course, see, the whiter it's going to be. So these final touches need to be heavier. Kind of like oil painting. The heavier stuff goes on at the end. I'm trying to connect all of this so that doesn't look so random and weird. That's a bit harsh, but that's okay. But I'm going to stop fiddling with it because I'm going to ruin it if I keep going. So we will call this done. And there you go.